Hi, my name is Megan Kohler, and I'm part of the business development team here at Shadowcat, and I am really excited to introduce today's webinar. We're going to talk about how the operational demands of single vessels are really outpacing the industry's ability to meet those needs. Support vessels used to be a real niche addition for really seasoned programs. But what we're seeing nowadays is a big shift in that shadow vessels are sort of becoming a foregone conclusion in modern programs. Owners are starting to incorporate helicopters, larger tenders, expedition equipment, all of which require operational capability. And this raises an important question for the industry. Are we structuring these programs in the most effective way from the beginning? Today's discussion is really about fleet architecture. We'll talk about how the industry is adapting to larger operational demands, and we'll explore what happens when support capability is planned early versus late, and whether a multi-vessel approach creates advantages the market is only now beginning to fully understand. I'm looking forward to sharing this conversation with you and hearing from an incredible panel of experts.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Alex von Stein. I'm the CEO of SOS Yachting, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'd like to take a moment to thank Jennifer Smith of Shadowcat for inviting me to moderate this interesting panel discussion. Joining me on the panel are industry expert Sam Thompson, partner of JMS, Jennifer Smith, founder of Shadowcat, Scott Google, aviation specialist on deck aviation, and Dean Dutoit, National Marine. So let me start off with Sam. A couple of questions for you. Sam, I would like to start with you from the program and advisory perspective. As the yacht programs have evolved to include aviation, larger tenders, and more specialized equipment, have you seen the operational structure of these programs change over time?
Yes. Put simply, I think what we've seen initially is how, first of all, I think a lot of the design of these yachts have changed significantly over the last decade, where everything was encompassed in one. Now we're seeing a lot more beach clubs, right? And as we see all these beach clubs, which are fantastic, it gives owners a lot more experience onto the water. But that automatically takes away a lot of the original kind of tender bay storage areas that we used to be, and people used to now kind of put things up on the bow. And what we're finding is that you just cannot fit the toys that are wanting to be used, let alone limo tenders, let alone larger tenders which people want to utilize. So what we're finding now is that initially owners went, okay, I need a chase boat, but they started off with a 40-footer or 50-footer, which it satisfies the need initially. Mm-hmm. But from an operational standpoint, it's needing more crew, and we have to then try and find a place for them. They sleep on board these smaller tenders, but then these tenders are then generally towed, which the insurance companies are now becoming, we see them sinking or being lost at sea regularly. Is one of the major claims within the insurance game, and it is becoming more and more frustrating. So for us as a management perspective, we're having to deal with that. And what we're then seeing is that the client is actually then recognizing that maybe if they had another boat that could look after all this, they could have all the fun and usability of the mothership to be able to then utilize the toys and the plays. And what they're also saying is, because they invariably get limited, and a lot of them are going down the commercial route, that they're getting limited in regard to the amount of people they can have on board. So then what they use is their secondary function to keep all their toys and to put their guests or the other kind of support staff of their family on a secondary vessel that will then follow or go ahead and find the bay, have all the toys ready, so when they arrive in the mothership, they can get out and play.
That's great. As you're as JMS and yourself are very involved, really upfront in the planning stages, really meeting clients when they're sitting in front of a white sheet of paper. When are the first indicators for you that a program is becoming more complex and in how it operates?
Well, it's funny because it's with with the clients at the early stages, you've got to find and you've got to try and meet their expectations. Now, obviously, this is invariably quite often with the brokers holding their hand, and because we don't do in the brokerage side, we literally come in and go in and say, well, how are you wanting to use this? Where are you wanting to use this? What are your expectations? What do you actually like to do? And then once they give that, that's at that point when invariably, actually, the brokers are pretty good at saying, hey, you know what you need? You need 2 boats, right? Rather than 1. Obviously, that's in their game. But for our point of view, it's only when it depends. So we're seeing more and more new owners coming into yachting, coming in and buying bigger boats off their first vessel. Invariably, they've come in from a charter background. So they haven't necessarily owned. And it's through that experience that they actually then can see what the value is. It's from our point of view, is explaining to them how these actually run, how they, we give them the cost analysis, which will go down later, but we give them an example about what to expect with crewing. Crewing is I suppose it's the most expensive part of yachting, other than the actual initial purchase. So when you're running these vessels, crew is the most, but it's also the one which will give the client the most enjoyment. Okay, it'll also potentially give the most stress, and so that's where we have to give them an understanding about what to expect and what crew can expect. Because if you're overworking and pushing crew and safety and overwork, hours of work and rest is being sacrificed for the client's enjoyment, you'll see a massive fall in regard to safety capabilities, as well as enjoyment for the crew, and then thus enjoyment for the clients. Actually, having a smaller mothership with a support vessel is actually going to be much more cost effective than having a monstrous mothership.
Trying to have that do everything,
but also the usability of that, by the way. That's the other side. I mean, you only look at Bezos. So you only have to look at Bezos, and the reason why he's put his monstrous mothership up for sale is because
can't do anything with it.
You can't get anywhere with it, right?
Yeah.
You put a 60-meter or a 70-meter, you can get in most of these places, right? And have that support vessel out there running around, setting up and doing all the work and all the toys and everything else that you can want to do. Yeah. If you want to get into Saint-Tropez, that's what you do. So, I mean,
there's not potentially, because that's what we found with the Loney and Hodor program. That was a lot less expensive. That has turned out to be a lot less expensive across the board than pushing a bigger Fed ship around the world.
Well, it kind of fits your question, the last question here, which was, are there areas having a second vessel improves efficiency in ways that may not be immediately obvious at the outset? And I think that...
Okay, well, then I think in regard to that question, I think then you can look at it right from the beginning, right? So if you're wanting to have all these toys that the support vessel will carry, whether it be submarines, whether it be helicopters, whether it be massive... we had ones with cigarette boats. We had ones with trimarans on it. It's amazing what toys you can get and enjoy. To get that on a mothership, you're going to have to go very, very large, right? And that is a huge cost at the initial stages. You're looking at 300, 400, 500 million when you can get a 70-meter, for instance, with a support vessel at a fraction of that cost. And that's where an initial cost saving that could probably run those 2 vessels for years to come at the same cost that you've saved in regard to this large vessel. So that's one area. Secondary, if you are pushing around a monstrous vessel, which you can't park anywhere, by the way, and you can, if you're going in at a 70-meter, you can still... I think 65 or something like that, and get into Portofino, just about sucking in. But you can't with the monsters. You have to anchor miles offshore. But also the cost of running that huge vessel compared to 2 smaller ones, you'll have much more usability. You will also have probably less crew. As I said, the crew costs are significant when it comes down to all these operations. Fuel efficiency, I'm sure, is up there, and likewise, the ability from an operational standpoint to be able to run these as independent units of themselves as well as part of the fleet. You can send them ahead. You can get everything prepared. The owners can then just arrive and use them. So, cost-wise, from the outset, you could save hundreds of millions if you wanted to, and then operationally, as you say, you can save primarily from crew costs to fuel efficiencies and the like. So yeah, I personally believe that if the client wanted to sacrifice just a little bit of humongous space, which we can know is really almost wasted, they still only have 12 guests on board these enormous vessels.
Mhm.
You can go on a 70-meter and have an amazing space, as we've all known. We've been on them, and still have the 12 guests. But then you have the support vessel. You can probably get another 12 on if you so desire, if you want to squeeze them in. So yeah, I think I can see the cost efficiencies.
So thank you very much. Talking about arrival to the vessel is quite frequently done with some aircraft of some sort. So I'd like to move over to Scott on the aviation side. Scott, when the aviation becomes part of a yacht program, how does it begin to influence the overall design and layout of the vessel?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, again, it depends on the owner operator's experience with the aircraft already. If they have a particular helicopter model that they're already utilizing or in mind, the big question becomes: is it going to be a quote certified pad or not? And that's an often misunderstood situation, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be certified to be a good, safe helicopter pad, but helicopter area. But I feel like a few bullet points with this is the future proofing of it, right? So you have a client that has an H145, and they love it. It's great for the yacht capabilities, but then maybe they have an H160 on land that they use, and they occasionally want to land that on the vessel as well, or a Sikorsky S76 or something like that. So the future proofing of it, the size of it, and then also the conversations around the hangar. Again, a topic that we're all familiar with is the hangar. Do we need one? Do we have to have one? And you can put a helicopter on the back of a boat and go around the world and never even take the blades off. That's what we've done for years, and it's fine. Or to really have a comprehensive corrosion control program and the staff that you need and the mechanics and all that, that's where the hangar conversation really comes into play. So yes, these things early on, and honestly, the truth of it is they're typically not brought up until later when these decisions are already made, and quite frankly, nothing's going to change. And things as blade folding and things like that. There's a lot of assumptions made early on, I think, and blade folding on one helicopter is very easy versus an AW139 or Leonardo 139. It's a very complicated process. So that's where in the early phases, I feel like there's probably a little bit of a deficiency there.
In the context of fleet architecture, how does a shadow vessel, enable you to really optimize the helicopter operations?
Yeah, so with the Shadow Cat and the space you have, or on a large support vessel like that, again, the conversation would start with the hangar and the owner's expectations. If, for example, during the owner's guest trip, if he wants to be able to, if they fly a lot with a Shadow Cat type vessel, it's rare, but you have an opportunity to have a hangar that's large enough to put the helicopter in with the blades on. There's only one example of that is out there. So the owner can fly in the morning, for example, the top tier level here. The owner can fly in the morning. Helicopter is not outside all day in the sun. It can go back in the hangar. The air crew that he has, a comprehensive air crew, can do downloads and updates and navigation updates without pulling those blades off. During guest trips, we don't pull blades off and we don't fold helicopter blades, right? So the helicopter is either out on the deck or it's not. So when you have a Shadow Cat type of a vessel where that's an option, that changes everything. I mean, the helicopter can go in the hangar, put the blades on. Okay, there's another flight today at 4 p.m. Great. Put the helicopter out. And when you have a comprehensive air crew like that, that relates to the maintenance program. Obviously, room for the maintenance team to do what they do. Some of these helicopters require, scaffolding and ladders and things like that. So that's the top tier level, right? I can put this helicopter in the hangar, do what I need to do all day, put it back out for another flight. A step down from that is, okay, I do have the hangar, but I need to fold the blades or take them off. And again, but that's not going to happen on guest trips. So that's where that top level conversation comes in of, what is this vessel for? Well, it's for the submarine, it's for the helicopter, what have you. And again, the driving factor here is the owner's expectation of the aviation program. And typically these owners have comprehensive aviation programs on land with their own expectations of fleet replacement for the aircraft. Hey, every 5 years we're going to buy a new aircraft. But we sell aircraft that have been on yachts for many years, and quite often everyone thinks that they're salt laden, corrosive, but if there's a good program in place, but you need the space to do that. You need the space to do that and the equipment to do that and the staff. There's a lot of things that go on in the background. There's one owner I was speaking with, and I made a comment to him. He said, "Why do I need all this stuff?" I said, "Well, this AW139 that you have, when you're not looking, there's a lot of stuff going on to keep this aircraft operational for you around the world 24/7. So there's a lot of that, obviously, as we know, that goes into that, and that needs to happen even during guest trips. So that's where having a hangar that you can, again, tier one operation, roll that thing into the hangar and do this stuff, and the owner's never disappointed.
Scott, thank you very much. Dean, moving on to you, Dean Dutois from National Marine. I've been noticing a sort of an exponential increase in the size of the types of tenders, 53-foot HCBs, Hydrosport custom boats, sitting on a shadow vessel, etc. How are you seeing the frequency and intensity of these assets being used? Is it increasing?
Oh, without a doubt. I tell you, I can't even explain how many tenders go from, he so enjoys the 30-foot center console, but now he wants the 40-foot center console, and it's never big enough. First of all, the sea conditions aren't necessarily always perfect. So the bigger the tender is, the better experience the owner and the guest, and for safety for what they're trying to do. When they take the yachts to locations, it's about getting to a destination. If they do not have a berth, you need to get the owners to the dive site. You need to get the owners to the island, or you need to get the owners to the port. This lends itself to the tenders are not going to stop getting big. They've just designed a 67-foot Scout. The orders for Scout is going crazy for them to be tenders to be towed. That's a 67-foot boat to be towed around. And then now, as the Shadow Cat has evolved and the shadow part of the industry's evolved, that allows these boats to carry tenders on board. And that right there is the complete game changer. It also allows you to make sure that the tenders do not get destroyed being towed, and that's a fact. There's not a tender out there that doesn't get towed, that does not go through significant amount of wear and tear.
I'd also chuck in here as well, Dean. I think from an operational point of view, the fuel efficiencies of lugging that massive great thing behind you, it puts wear and tear on the mains and also the fuel efficiency. It's not good, and it's not safe. When issues occur, when weather comes in, we've had crew, they've had to cut the tender loose because they can't go out on and to try to bring this tender in or put someone in it to drive it safely. It's incredibly, from a safety aspect, we hate seeing these crew boats, towboats.
There's a huge safety perspective here, and that safety is that the crew will almost do anything to try save the tender. And I can't even tell you how many stories and disaster stories we've heard of crews or the tow harnesses for some reason breaking or so on and so forth, and they're in a tremendous The sea conditions don't allow it, but there's crew members in the middle of the ocean diving out there to go find and rescue a tender. So there's so many different variables. Yes, they do want bigger tenders. The owner wants a bigger experience, and that lends itself to, there's no such thing as big enough when it comes to tenders, but there's also so many variables that lends itself to the opportunities where shadow boats are the game changer in the industry right now.
Yeah.
And people are seeing it.
So how does that really change the way vessels need to be designed to support these activities? Because you're saying the tenders are getting larger, so obviously there's a need to carry fuel as well. The last HC, the last center console I was on, it didn't seem to be burning very efficient with the 600 horsepower out the back. So, are you seeing need for fuel capacity, fuel storage?
Well, without a doubt, I mean that lends it to the comments I made earlier, that the yachts are never designed around the tenders, whether it be fuel, whether it be any part of that, and that gets to the point where a shadow boat is specifically designed to carry the Shadow Cat. There's monohulls and there's cats. It's quite clear we all understand the big difference there. What a Shadow Cat lends itself, or a catamaran hull lends itself to the size of the vessel, the platform that it allows to put on. It's unlimited as far as what size you can put on a platform like that. The monohulls, at night, also they are a shadow. They serve a great purpose, but the platform on a catamaran is night and day. The amount of toys you can put on that platform. So when you design a super yacht, I don't care how big the boat is, as we were talking earlier, it'll never be designed around the tenders, the toys. I remember Sam mentioned earlier, I sat on the bridge of the deck of Golden Odyssey, I want to say in 1992, and Peter Jago showed me the design of Golden Shadow. And I scratched my head and I'm like, wow, how could you possibly, and this goes back way before time. And the owner was an avid diver, but the Shadow Golden Odyssey did not have a decompression chamber, did not have the size chase vessels that it required. And going back that far, they designed the Shadow, which was a very large boat. It was a ship, but it had the hospital, it had the decompression chamber, it had everything you can imagine, from the Cessna Caravan to the Sea Ray to the tenders. So that lends it to where, when you are designing a yacht, there's only so much you can put into a super yacht. Going into the shadow boats, it is a game changer. It is, as I said, it's the owner's experience, it's the guest's experience. It's a complete package.
If you had an owner, and this is really a question also for Sam as well, if you have an owner that's just looking at a mothership, say, the biggest things out there right now are 140, 160 meter. In your experiences, what would you say would be the sort of upper limit of a tender that could be put on board one of those safely?
It all depends how much space you want to give up on the mothership. It lends, the owner's experience. You want to get rid of the aft deck, and instead of put a pool, you want to put a big, 50-foot tender. The owner's experience now, it's a beach club. They're designing beach clubs that are incredible, folding doors and everything. Some boats that never put it into perspective of piling tenders in there, and there's only so big of a boat. The size can only fit into the sides when the sides fold up. So you're very limited on the mothership, and it doesn't matter how big the mothership is. The owner doesn't want to give up his swimming pool in the back. He doesn't want to give up his pool deck. And that's where it boils down to that. And I think, Sam, you've experienced in that. The owner doesn't want to give up anything. He wants everything, but he's not willing to give up the space and the luxuries for his guests and himself.
Absolutely. And there also comes in, we were talking about CAPEX again around this. When they're designing these boats at the end, and they say, okay, I want this 50-foot limo and everything else that goes with it, and all singing, all dancing. I mean, yes, there'll be a few tenders, there will be a tender bay and everything else. But if they're wanting to go that big, you're having to put massive doors in these hulls of these vessels, which is huge cost going into it. And the operational kind of, as you say, they don't generally want to put them on the beach deck, so they're going to put them up on the bow now, right? So in the bow, and then you've got these huge doors which are opening up, and getting these boats in and out of those things. It is the most stressful environment to do as crew. You have to then maneuver the vessel around to try to create slack water and everything else that goes with it. It's tough, and this is beside their day job as crew, right? This is something that they're trying. So you get these green crew, and let's not talk about the fact that high numbers of crew for these large vessels. You have to get them, and invariably you're having to train young kids, and let's be blunt, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids about these processes, standard operating procedures to be able to lift and pick up these tenders. We have accidents all the time, and they've got these standard operating procedures. They've got clear defined. They're drilled in it. It is the high risk environment. However, it's because they don't do it all the time. When you're doing it all the time, like on a support vessel, right? Like a Shadowcat, this is what you do day in, day out, and you become efficient. You become highly skilled at it. And for me, that the safety aspects, let alone the additional cost and everything else for putting in the mothership, it's nuts. And you need big lifting gear, serious lifting gear to get these guys on.
Alex, sorry, but when you're trying to design on a mothership, the launching, as Sam has just said, the safety aspect, what you can design into a shadow boat is night and day. The elevators on the CAT, the center in the center of the hull, there's no better platform than that, besides cranes and lifting and so on and so forth. And the cost involved in trying to make a mothership into a vessel that can do these operations is astronomical in comparison to having a shadow boat.
It seemed to me that there was a threshold at some point, as previously as flagged, looking at some of the tenders that were coming, and one of the tenders, a 53-foot, was 17 tons fully loaded, and the deployment system was sort of out the side on a extendable crane, and I was sort of starting to question at what point 17 tons starts to affect the stability of the boat. So is the threshold really driven by size and weight of the equipment, or does it need to be deployed? I think, does it need, or how it needs to be deployed and operated? I mean, is there a balance, or is it one or the other?
Listen, I think there's many different ways to launch and recover vessels, right? And Dean brought up Golden Shadow before us. So, we had a lift platform on the back. You drive it in, lift it up, and you know what? Safest thing I've ever had on any vessel I've ever. I was one of the crew members on there back in the day. Not quite 92, but I was 96, right? But it was, and for me, it's hands down the safest way to recover a vessel. And we used to recover the seaplane and everything else on that same platform. And I know that what Jennifer's designed in the past is very similar. You can do these different things, and it got the difference. Right.
Look at Hodor. Look at Hodor with their cigarettes and their cats and their elevator. It's an absolute game changer. Not just safety, but the practicality of how they load the boats and what they do, and the other designs that they have.
And speed. And this is that's a major point. Speed. They've all picked up and gone.
Yeah, we've all seen the pictures of a little vessel called Dragonfly. That picked a 47-foot Freeman that we were very much involved in from the lifting to everything there. What an absolute nightmare and a scary entire process launching and deploying that boat. Dragonfly being a very, very, very large vessel, it's taken up the entire upper deck for that one single boat that is being carried around right now. So those are the things.
So definitely a need for shadow boats for sure.
Yes.
When you actually, I mean, from an operational standpoint, when, during launch and recovery, what are the complications when everything's happening at the same time? You've got guests coming on, guests going off, people swimming, vessels being launched. What actually happens during that process? Do you sort of keep everybody on board while you're launching this thing? How do you deal with that operationally?
That whole process takes place, first thing in the morning or before the guests even get up. There is no launching. There's no deploying. I think we've all seen this, the newest and latest, greatest in the inflatable toy market, which is unbelievable. They're creating islands. We're designing islands. We're designing platforms. I remember in 1998 on Jamasa, we designed the first slide that ever got built. And what a massive crane experience this was. I think if you ever, every deckhand's nightmare is inflatable toys and trying to deploy and get everything set up for the owners before they get out of bed or for when they do that. And then it gets to the point that they have to, the owner does not like the anchorage and wants to move the boat. So 2-3 hours later, all the toys are deflated and finally now the boat is ready to go, or if weather comes up. So once that's the case, a shadow boat is once again the game changer. There is nothing to worry about. There's shadow programs that will basically set up all the toys, inflate everything, and then tow it to the mothership and have it ready to go. When they're finished playing, they tow it back to the shadow boat, and it becomes, a problem, or not necessarily a problem, but a solution for the entertainment and the entire experience, whether it be a charter guest or the owners experience themselves.
That's another aspect that you've got to also understand, is that these things make noise. When you are launching and recovering vessels, it is noisy, right? Yeah. And you're doing this at first thing in the morning to make sure it's all ready. And the amount of complaints that we get because of this from our clients going, why are they doing this? Yeah, why are you lifting? Because you wanted to depart at 8 a.m. in the morning. So we have to lift all the tenders either late at night or first thing in the morning. Because of the safety aspect, we were going to do it in the morning. Yeah, all of this doesn't happen. If you've got the support vessel, what happens over there? No noise. Oh, no. It's all peaceful. They'll wake up in the next bay because invariably the vessel will set off and they'll wake up in the next bay without any noise.
Dean, thank you very much for that. And Sam, thank you for your intervention on there. I'd like to move on to Jennifer Smith, the founder of ShadowCat. Jennifer, this brings us to how these programs are structured overall. We're increasingly seeing owners asked about support vessels early in the process, but often move forward with the primary yacht first and then revisit that conversation later. What tends to happen in those scenarios when the support vessel is considered after the mothership has already been delivered?
Excellent question. I'm, not a lot of good, if I could just give you the short answer, but really it ends up being about compromise at that point. There's something that we're giving up. If we are waiting until later on in the development or even after the commitment of the mothership, we're not really talking about integrating, we're talking about compensating. And that's just missed opportunities. It is inefficient use potentially of volume that has been designed into the mothership that could have been offset on the shadow vessel. One of our luxuries in managing those shadow solutions is that we are quite unfettered by what a guest is going to see when they look at this beautiful asset. They want to see their gorgeous boat that has been designed by a famous designer that is holistically and completely a beautiful aesthetic package. We're not tied to that because we're the garage, the garden shed, the guest house, whatever you want to call us. So we get to focus on function, efficiency, safety, all of those things as priorities. And that lets us do those jobs very, very, very well, make those decisions from those perspectives. If you ask us really late in the game, we do our very, very best and still provide a very, very successful project. But it's just, I think there's some sacrifices in those scenarios.
Do you see limitations in how those vessels can be configured or integrated into the overall program at that stage?
I wouldn't say limitations. I would say probably more about lost opportunity. You know, we have kind of dealt with every one of those scenarios. We've even had a situation where the client got their shadow vessel first, and it was quite effective at making sure they had everything that they needed, whether they were on their own boat or on a chartered vessel. You know, it was quite a genius approach that I wish I had thought of. So no, we exponentially improve the experience in any case. You know, it's just a shame that we're not making use of every opportunity, one, and two, that puts us in a position where the client has to wait. And what we're seeing, you know, I cannot tell you the amount of phone calls I have gotten in the last 12 months from very, very large programs who probably set out to build their 100+ meter vessel, presuming they had everything covered. And they're calling in close to a panic. What do you have ready? Is there anything I can get in 6 months? Is there anything that you've got in construction? Which we're bespoke. Of course we don't. So
that actually
then,
led, that actually led to one of my questions, because I think everybody in on this call sees decision making is being made later, with an urgency factor that's come into play. And that's one of the questions I had is, when you get that call, we need a quick delivery. You know, does that then have an influence on how you can optimize the vessel or customize, or, you know?
Well, that's such an excellent question, and it's probably the thing that I'm working the hardest to fix right now. Because we've always been bespoke. So we always start with, what is the functional need? What is the operational need? Is this the client that the big tenders are the driver? Is the big, you know, sport fish the driver? Is it the sub? Is it needing extra staff because they have an entourage of security and assistants and people that need to travel with them? You know, which one of those is driving this boat? And then we get to solve that problem according to what the problem is. We have avoided specs and series vessels because we think that robs that client of that level of creativity, in the problem solving. But we are most likely going to have to, until we can get everybody on board with start the conversation early, we're going to probably have to come with something that we intend to make as many people happy as possible. But if you're saying, you know, could you pull a plan off the shelf? I could pull a plan off the shelf, reproduce something we've already delivered in the 24-month region, but I can probably get you just about anything you want in the 30 to 36. So is that extra 6 or 12 months going to be worth it? Are you going to do what a lot of folks have done, is just go buy something that is on the market that doesn't solve many of your problems at all and just kind of suffer until we can get one going? I mean, I would say if there were a problem, that is the one that we need to solve by this dialogue we're having today, and doing a better job at, you know, bringing the rest of the industry on board with this reality.
Yeah, I think everybody on this call, or, you know, running their respective businesses, are big advocates of pre-planning. So I'd like to maybe explore an alternative. It's how would the outcome change if the support vessel were actually being planned alongside the mothership from the very beginning? How do you see that playing out?
Well, that's playing out right now in real time with a number of our clients that we're engaged with in active development for projects that are going to be, you know, going to construction quite soon. They're brilliant. It is like the heavens have opened and the angels are singing because everybody is around the same table, and the flight departments are communicating about, I'll be able to do this here, I'll be able to do this here. The deck departments, the client's security teams, this has become a very, very, very big requirement these days. You know, there is more and more scrutiny on clients at our level of the market, and they are really trying to get ahead from a digital standpoint, from a physical standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
and from a sort of a surveillance standpoint ahead of that. And that needs a platform. That needs a platform for those
Yeah.
people. It needs a platform for that equipment. So it is, again, I will say unequivocally that once a client or a program has embraced this concept, they would never go back. They would never, ever give up that facility again.
So that you'd say that, does that allow then for more deliberate distribution of capability across the program?
Absolutely. A lot more considered, a lot more considered focus. We've talked about that sort of CAPEX and OPEX comparison, which is such an important conversation to be having. I think that's part of what we hope to demystify is, every hour that a mothership is doing support work is an expensive misuse of a really, really premium platform. So every time you are pushing that big, gorgeous Lurchen fed ship Ocean Co through the water, you're telling the client, you need to get off the pool deck because we've got some helicopter operations and you just can't use it. I mean, every time you've got doing something like that, it's an inefficiency, it's a cost, it's just not worthwhile. I mean, even in weight distribution, you put all those heavy tenders on my boat that is more fuel efficient because I don't have any fairing. We're not loading it up with extra heavy layers of thing that it's pulling around. It's a huge money saving, not just operationally, which I think we've covered how much better it is operationally, but even when you're talking about preserving the economic life of some of these assets. Scott mentioned it with the helicopter. I don't know what the metric is, but there's got to be a comparison of how much longer a life you get out of a very expensive helicopter asset by keeping it in a hangar and keeping it maintained on board. Or what Sam and Dean have been speaking about with these tenders, which are millions and millions of dollars. These things are not, they're not ribs. These, or even those are up in price. Those are sitting in a protected place and serviced, and each one of those, your replacement schedule reduces. There's just countless things that a program, when they're looking at it from that perspective, get to, GT to GT of a mothership is tremendously, exponentially higher than the GT cost of a shadow vessel. So if you move off every bit of that cargo space and, reserve fuel even, you're better off.
That's a big one.
Then also from an operational way, then you turn those spaces into spas. You also on the support vessel, you also then get specialist crew that maintain that equipment, right? So rather than engineers on the mothership are engineers for the mothership, right? You don't have necessarily kind of outboard engineers or sub mechanics. These people's skill sets can be brought in, which is, again, if you're maintaining those assets on board with specialist technicians or who are specializing in that maintenance, it makes a massive difference in regard to longevity and cost effectiveness.
It seems to give a lot more flexibility in the in using different aspects of the program.
Well, and one thing I'll say, if and this is sort of me asking my own hard question, is what's the pushback? Why aren't they doing it? That's an excellent question, I think, for me to kind of comment on. And I would say that there's been a lot of evolution. In the beginning, it was, who needs two boats? I think we're getting past that point. I think there's enough of these out on the water that people are seeing these programs. Building them together symbiotically, I think that there was a lot of opinion amongst brokers, particularly. That's going to be a resale problem. Don't create dependency that is going to potentially make each of these separately an asset that's got its own functionality independently. And we've only had one of our vessels resell, so we really just have the one example of that. But I can see that really happens across the entire support vessel market, they're like gold. There was remarkable, robust competition for the one vessel that we've had that was available for charter or sale. And it was incredibly encouraging. The client was ecstatic, was in the very fortunate spot of being able to let go of a vessel and not as is normal, lose a lot of equity in it. So I think we're really, all of these things that were initially resistance points, is it going to be too hard to operate? Clearly it's not, because people are doing it. And all these programs, every significant program that's been launched in recent history has ended up either coming, very quickly obtaining one, or putting themselves in the market for one right away.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and patience going over these questions. I hope it's of use for the wider industry and the folks that will be watching this later on.
Thank you, Alex. Great job.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you,
Pleasure,
Alex.
everyone.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.